Hello and welcome. I'm Jeannie Long, Executive Director of Chicago Collections Consortium, and I'm proud to share that this afternoon's program, Public Records in Chicago, Acquisition and Accessibility, is part of a continued partnership between Chicago Collections Consortium and Chicago Area Archivists. Please note that today's program will be recorded and available for viewing again on Chicago Collections website and YouTube channel. We'd like to begin our program with Chicago Collections Land Acknowledgement Statement, which reads, Chicago Collections Consortium acknowledges and is grateful for the Native peoples who laid the foundation for the city of Chicago and for the diverse Indigenous nations that reside in Chicago today. When you visit our member organizations and when you experience Chicago outdoor spaces, we invite you to join in offering respect and gratitude to the many Indigenous peoples that reside in the Chicagoland region, as well as their ancestors. For those of you who are new to Chicago Collections Consortium, CCC is a consortium comprised of museums, libraries, and cultural heritage organizations, all working together for the preservation, promotion, and sharing of Chicago's rich history and culture. This occurs through the sharing of member archival collections on CCC's free and open access Explore Chicago Collections portal, as well as through free programs like the one being offered today. Chicago Area Archivists is a member organization whose work provides opportunities for local archivists, historians, librarians, and others in Chicago to meet for discussion, education, and information sharing. I encourage you to visit CAA's website to learn more about the events and consider joining CAA. Also, many of you may have joined us way back in 2021 for the program Chicago Municipal Records, Access and Accountability, another joint program we hosted with CAA. And a recording of that program can be found on Chicago Collections website under our event page. Additional resources on public programs shown here can be found on the organizational websites of our panelists. Now I'm pleased to introduce today's moderator, Gretchen Neidhart. Gretchen is Metadata and Digital Projects Librarian, Galter Health Sciences Library and Learning Center, Feinberg School of Medicine, Northwestern University, and a member of Chicago Area Archivists and co-chair of Chicago Collections Controlled Vocabulary Committee. Thank you, Gretchen, for all your work in organizing today's discussion. And I'd like to turn it over to you for the introduction of our esteemed panelists.
Thank you so much, Jeannie, and thank you to all our attendees here today and our panelists. I'm really excited to be able to offer this follow-up to our 2021 Municipal Records panel. That panel featured more researchers than archivists, although there was an archivist and librarian there as well. And many in our audience then, including our panelists, were interested in speaking more to some of the sources of this archival information. So while a panel full of everyone in the city who works with Chicago records would be logistically very difficult, we have 4 amazing representatives here for you today, and we may have more in the future for other follow-ups, so stay tuned. We briefly showed some resources, and these will get shared again with you too, but I do want to refer folks to Northeastern Illinois University's amazing research guide. They've really collected in one spot most, if not all, of the local organizations that hold city records, including contact information and some interviews with folks that work there. So I highly recommend you check that out. I also highly recommend starting your search for Chicago City Records at explore.chicagocollections.org. There's lots of amazing stuff there too. So the first portion of our panel today will be 5 directed questions for our panelists. They've gotten these in advance. For this portion, a reminder to everyone that we'll be kept on mute. If you do have questions you'd like to ask our panelists, we'll have time for those at the end. Please go ahead and use the Q&A module to answer those. That's the most efficient way to get your questions in front of us. You can enter questions in the chat, but just cautioning you, we will be prioritizing things that go into the Q&A first. Captioning has been enabled. If you would like to show that, you should be able to do so by going to the More ... menu at the bottom of your screen, clicking on Captions and then Show Captions. As Jeannie mentioned, this panel is being recorded and it will be available on both Chicago Collections website and Chicago Area Archivists YouTube channel, along with a linked document from resources discussed today. All right. without further ado, I want to get started by actually having our panelists introduce themselves, as well as their role at their various institutions. So I'm going to start first with Johanna Russ, who, let's see, let me get back to my slides. Here we go, is from Chicago Public Library.
Hi, thanks, Gretchen. Yes, I'm Johanna Russ, and I work at the Special Collections Unit of Harold Washington Library Center downtown. As you can see from the slide, I am part of the Archives and Special Collections Division at CPL, which is a relatively new division that formed at the end of 2020. And it puts together 4 units, including my own, the Northside Neighborhood History Collection at Sulzer Regional Library, the Vivian G. Harsh Research Collection of Afro-American History and Literature at Woodson Regional Library, and an exhibits unit that operates system-wide, but has offices here downtown in Harold, Washington. One thing you might notice from this organizational chart that is relevant to today's conversation is the municipal reference collection is not a part of our division. So I'm not going to be speaking to that collection today, just so you know.
Thank you so much. Next, I am going to go to Matt Messbarger. Oh, Matt, I think you might still be on mute.
Thank you. Sorry.
That's okay.
Sorry, let me back up. My name is Matt Messbarger, and I am the archival specialist for the Office of the City Clerk. And I am principally responsible for managing our record series and making sure that we're in compliance with the city records retention policies, as well as the state records retention policies. We have about 50 series of records that we collect and maintain and provide access to on an as requested basis. I also respond to FOIA requests as they come in from the public. I also just respond to general research requests. We help everyone regardless of how the question comes in. I also manage like archival processing projects, digital reformatting projects. So pretty much anything to do with archival materials and just making sure that they're preserved and accessible to, in some form. And that's pretty much it.
Thank you. I'm stopping my share briefly, and next I will go to Doug Bickness.
Hi, so I'm the director at the National Archives at Chicago. I've been here since 2006. So I just supervise the 6 people here. We do all parts of the archival life cycle. And then I just coordinate our program with the larger National Archive system. Before that, I used to be an archivist at the University of Illinois at Chicago, and that was the last library degree from the University of Michigan before they switched to the information program, and got an MA in history before that. So.
Thank you. And our 4th panelist, Deborah Witzberg.
Hi, I'm Deborah Witzberg. I'm Inspector General for the City of Chicago. I lead the city's Office of Inspector General, where we conduct oversight over the operations of city government. We do that in a bunch of different ways. Most relevant to today's discussion is our work in data transparency. So we do a lot of work making data about city operations, about the way the city runs, available to members of the public.
Thank you. So our second question is related. Some of you have touched on this definitely, but the second question is to tell us a little bit more about your archive. What government records do you hold, and how can the public access them? So I'm going to throw it to Doug to answer this one first.
Okay. So the National Archives, our mission is to preserve and provide access to records of the federal government. So for Chicago, we would have records that document the relationship between the federal government and the city of Chicago, Cook County, and all the people that live there as well. So if when you're doing your research, you see the words federal or you see the US fill in the blank, think about contacting us. The Chicago branch here in Chicago, what we do is we get records that the federal government creates from the states of Illinois, Indiana, Minnesota, Michigan, Ohio, and Wisconsin. So overall, that's about 138,000 cubic feet of records that go back to 1803 when Ohio became a state. The largest body of records within that is about 88,000 cubic feet from the US District Courts. And within that, the largest is 27,000 cubic feet from the Northern District of Illinois Court at 219 South Dearborn. So 27,000 cubic feet is a lot of records, court records just on Chicago itself, in addition to all of our other records. What we don't have are any records from the Obama administration. Those are with the Obama Presidential Library up at Hoffman Estates. We don't get legislative records. Those stay with Congress or the Center for Legislative Archives or wherever the individual congressional reps donate their papers. We also don't have a mission to document American life and culture. So we'll leave that to the Library of Congress, Smithsonian, or the Chicago Public Library, Chicago History Museum, or any of the academic libraries. So the best way to figure out if we have what you're looking for is to send us an email, chicago.archives@nara.gov. There's a lot of things you think would be here, but they're not. They're centralized in Washington, D.C. They're centralized in College Park. They're in a cave in Lenexa, Kansas. Or maybe it's been digitized already. If you do need to come in, we're open Monday through Friday. We have a research room that can hold 12 people. I did mention digitization. The agency's goal is to digitize 500 million pages by 2026, which is a lot of PhD dissertations, but we do have a total holdings of approximately 13 billion pages, so that ends up being about 3%. I'm going to talk mostly about court records, but I also want to point out that we do have a lot of other executive branch agencies. The most heavily used ones are the Bureau of Indian Affairs, the Army Corps of Engineers, Chinese Exclusion Act records from the Immigration and Naturalization Service, and the Coast Guard, and from General Services Agency, their real property disposal records. So that's our holdings in a nutshell.
Thanks for distilling that. That's a lot of holdings. All right, Deborah, I'll turn this question over to you.
Sure. So I mentioned that we do data transparency work, and that's in furtherance of our mission to promote accountability and transparency in city government. So I know this is one of the questions we'll talk a bit more about later. I'll just note here that the Municipal Code of Chicago grants the Office of Inspector General access to all of the city's data and records, papers, people, premises, et cetera, so that we can get the information we need in conducting our work. For purposes of what is available to the public, what that means, the place where our data transparency lives is on our information portal. It's on our website. It's informationportal.igchicago.org. And what users will find there are sets of data dashboards which display a wide range of data about the operations of city government in visualizations that can be manipulated. They can be filtered by year, geography, type of information, et cetera. So we have direct backend access to city databases. We clean and validate the city data that we get, several millions of rows of data per night. And then we automatically update those data dashboards for use. And those are in a bunch of different categories: city finances, city employees, and public safety, policing operations in Chicago. And so users of our information portal will find dashboards across those categories where they can see all of that data for themselves.
Thank you. All right, I'll turn it over to Matt. Matt, you have some very voluminous data to follow.
I'm not sure how to, I don't think our website has quite the voluminous amount of data yet. Actually, that's not true. So could you show the web page just so I can point out some resources? So the Office of the City Clerk, I work for the Council Division of the City Clerk's office, and what the Council Division does in part is produce the journal of proceedings every month, and that's basically the minutes of the city council meetings as they occur, generally once a month per calendar year. And our website has some resources available for recent years. We also archive council committee records, so summary reports of committee meetings, as well as legislation is filed in our office, and if there's any additional documentation that, let's say, doesn't, that informs the legislation but doesn't make it into the journal, we also archive that material. So just looking at our webpage, I just wanted to point out some resources that are available. So first of all, the Journal of the Proceedings is that's a kind of just like the official record of the city business. And we have on our page all the journals going back to 1981. Now that doesn't sound like a whole lot, but there are digital surrogates for all the journals from I believe 1850 to 1963 available from the Newberry Library on their Internet Archive page. So essentially the journal is available digitally for most years, with the exception of this kind of crucial era of Chicago history and American history, which is 1963, part of 1963 to part of 1981. There are no digitized journals, and our office is looking to close that gap and get those journals digitized and up on our website. So that's a priority of our current clerk's administration. She just is starting her new term, so it's one of the projects that she's excited about pursuing. So so the journal is a really important resource. We also have various materials that are available digitally. It sort of depends on the type of material as to how far back we have it available. So we have the monthly committee reports going back to 2019. We have city budgets going back to 1982. We have executive orders going back to 1978. We have legislative material mostly starting in 2010, I believe, but the earliest documents go back to 2006. And so you can, there's a lot to look at via the search legislation link on the left, and the meeting calendar option. The meeting calendar has notices of meetings, as well as links to a lot of the recorded council meetings going back to 2011. And currently, and again, just to say outright, our records are, they are in a couple of different places. So you do have a lot of places to look in order to access them. And so, for example, our current video recordings are on a Vimeo page that is linked. I believe it's the last link on this page. So the more recent committee meetings and city council meetings are available there. The older ones are available via the meeting calendar page. So lots of resources, just not all in one place, essentially. And then for everything that isn't digitized, which is actually pretty voluminous, that we have either on-site or in off-site storage. We do provide access to materials by request. We can digitize materials when possible. If we can't, we will set up a meeting for people to come in and look at something. If for whatever reason we can't digitize it. So, and we want to, you know, build out more resources for older archival materials on our webpage. So I think more will be forthcoming eventually. So I would say just, you know, when in doubt, call the city clerk's office if you want to see something, and we will get back to you.
Thank you, Matt. And then we'll go to Johanna.
Yeah, thanks, Gretchen. So you can see here a list of different city agencies for which we have some archival materials. I think we'll get more into it in question number 3 about why we have only some materials from some agencies. But for now, I just wanted to introduce those agencies we do have materials from. So Chicago Public Library, the system's history itself lives here. We have Harold Washington's mayoral administration records. We have photographs and architectural and landscape architectural drawings from the Chicago Park District. We have Chicago Open Space section. We have some photos from the Chicago sewers. We have images from the Chicago Department of Urban Renewal, one of which is there on the screen for you to see. We have Chicago Department of Water Management materials, Eugene Sawyer's mayoral administrative records, some Department of Public Works, Bureau of Engineering photographs, and the City of Chicago Graphics and Reproduction Center. We have their photographs as well. How you access them, any of these that are processed, their finding aids are available online for you to search. A few of these collections do have some digitized materials available in our digital collections. We have Harold Washington, some photos, and then speech transcripts digitized and available. We have Park District photographs available on our digital collections. Sewers are on the digital, and the urban renewal photos are up on the digital collections. Otherwise, if you want to come in and see, we have appointments for research on Mondays and Fridays and one Saturday a month. So you can look at the finding aids online, see if there's anything you want to make an appointment to come in and see. Explore the digital collections. Like everyone else has said, there's good stuff up there, but it's just the tip of the iceberg. So.
Thank you. Okay, my next question, which I'm glad you all had in advance because it's a little bit long, is about acquisition. So how are your government records acquired? Are any at your institution due to mandates or record management policies? And if so, when did these policies start? If these types of city records existed before the mandate, do you know if those are still available at your institution or if they're available at another location? And I'm going to turn to Matt first for this question. Sorry, Matt, you're on mute.
Yeah, no, Chicago has a notoriously unwieldy structure for accessing records. So the city clerk's office, there are a couple of rules that are part of the city's rules of order that mandate that we collect legislative material that is filed with us. They're specifically Rule 45 of the Rules of Order and Procedure. City Council requires City Council committees to keep records and file on a monthly basis with the city clerk. And Rule 46 stipulates that the city clerk shall maintain continuous and up-to-date records of all matters introduced, their status, and shall regularly report on such status, all of which shall be public records. So the Rules 45 and 46, that I don't know when those were established, but I believe that the records retention was always a part of the city clerk's job description. So at some point, I believe in 1962, the Illinois Local Records Act established regulation of preservation and disposal of public records for all units of local government in Illinois, and records retention schedules, et cetera. So that was, I think our first retention schedule with the state was sometime in the 80s, and it's been continuously updated. So, and as far as if the records come from before the mandate, so this isn't quite it's not that the city wasn't mandated to hold on to some records. Let me start that over. So there are some records that weren't really available to the public. These are older records, and so the city held on to them. They just weren't accessible. And at some point, the state, after the Local Records Act was passed, years after, asked or was approached about taking possession of these records. And the state did, and they moved them to the Northeastern Illinois University IRAD facility, where they've been accessible to the public since 1990, I believe. So, so they have records that originally were part of the city clerk's records, and they sort of roughly complement our records, so that if you're looking for something that would have been filed in the city clerk's office prior to 1943, there's a good chance it's at the IRAD facility in the Ronald Williams Library at Northeastern. And if it's from after 1943, it will be something that you could get from us. So yes, there has always been a mandate, as I understand it, but it got complicated, I think.
Thanks, Matt.
Yeah.
I'll go to Deborah.
I mentioned the municipal code of the city of Chicago obligates city departments to give us access to their information. That requirement has existed in some iteration or another back as far as that piece of legislation, back to the late 80s, with the piece of the municipal code that enables this office. There obviously are city records that were created before then, to which we have legal authority to get access as well. That's a little bit of a separate question from what is available on our information portal in terms of accessible data to the public. On our information portal, what we have, as I mentioned, draws directly from city databases, from operational databases across city departments. And those systems go back different amounts of time depending on the system. So for example, one area where we've made a lot of data visible and public has to do with misconduct complaints against members of the Chicago Police Department. The data that we have available goes back, we have kind of two generations of data. They go back to, the first generation goes back to a date in 2019, and then the second generation goes back to a date in 2007. That's a product of the fact that the police department has over time used different information systems to store those records. And I mentioned that by way of example to say that it is of course the case across city government that we have many different information systems. We have legacy systems kind of layered on top of each other, and the quality of integration among those systems is widely varying but rarely great. And so I think, I'm sure that all of you have found in your work, and many of you would find as users, that the question, there are different answers to the question of what is theoretically and legally available and what is readily accessible.
Thank you. Joanna.
Yeah, so I would say that almost none of the materials we have from city agencies has come to us by any type of mandate or any type of records retention schedule. I know there are records retention schedules that city agencies are abiding by. The materials that have made their way to us, sort of by happenstance. Often there will be an employee in whichever department who realizes, hey, we have a lot of old photos. They're pretty cool. We have to move offices. I don't want to throw them out, and they'll call the library. That's how we've gotten a lot of our material, quite honestly. Not all, but because of that, that's why it's kind of hit or miss which agencies we have. and which materials from those agencies that we have. We are not, again, part of like the mandated records retention policies. And so I think we can all recognize that might be problematic, that there's not a more comprehensive or uniform way for that to happen. But that's how it is. We are pleased that we do have the materials we have and happy to make them available as best we can. But we are not in any way an official city repository for archives.
Thank you. That's very clarifying. And Doug.
So we're kind of the opposite. All of our stuff comes through the records life cycle. We don't do any collecting for the most part. So all the agencies generally store their records in a federal records center, and it has to be associated with a disposition authority, and it has to have an inventory. And then the record center just takes note of this year, so many thousand cubic feet are ready for destruction, so many thousand cubic feet can go to the archives. So the last 5 years, we've accessioned about an average of 3,600 cubic feet every year. Since the records all have some kind of an inventory at the record center, unless the agency has identified that there's some kind of access restriction to it, which most records don't, they're open to the public and we can give access to it once it arrives. The inventory might not be what you're looking for because it makes sense to the Defense Logistic Agency or the EPA. It may not make sense to you, but at least we can give you some kind of an inventory. We don't get any born digital records at our facility. Those all go straight to the electronic record staff at College Park, Maryland. I just so when you might have seen the news, the OMB and the National Archives put out a mandate that all federal offices are supposed to be paperless by June 2024. So they are not supposed to send any more additional paper records to the record center. We'll still be getting records after that because the record center can hold about 800,000 cubic feet. So they'll just be working through the records life cycle, but steadily the stream of paper is coming to an end. So.
Oh, I had missed that. That is big news. Okay, so our fourth question is also still about access. It's what are your suggestions to researchers when they run into roadblocks regarding record access or availability? So we'll start with Deborah.
This is a question we come across a lot in our own work, as well as in questions from members of the public. I think that one of the challenges in looking for information from the city is in discerning two different types of problems from each other. We find that and we hear about others finding the same, that there are situations where information is being sort of obfuscated, if not intentionally, then sort of like by operation of city government. That's one kind of problem. The other kind of problem is a sort of data quality, access quality problem. And the end result of both of those types of problems might be difficulty getting the information you want, but the solutions are probably very different. So I think that would be my best advice would be to try to sort out which kind of problem you're having, whether the barrier you've encountered is a sort of force of will driven one, where there's kind of muscle memory and instinct around a lack of transparency. Chicago government has a long history of I think, to put it kindly, not having transparency be the first instinct. And so, that sort of habit-driven failure to live up to our transparency ideals, that's one kind of problem and bodes for one kind of solution, which is really about people. It's about changing human behavior. The second kind of problem is about the fact that the information systems, as we talked about, are challenging and complicated and underpowered and poorly integrated. And that's where information is stored in information systems. That's before we even get to the reality that lots of city records are sitting in water-stained banker's boxes on conference room floors with no good way to know what's there or how to find it. So I think that that's my best piece of advice, is that at the very beginning of that choose your own adventure story of challenges in getting city records, to try to determine which kind of problem you're dealing with.
Thank you, that's helpful. Johanna.
Yeah, I think since the kinds of city materials we have tend to be more archival in nature, I think we in archives and in helping researchers with more historical research are unfortunately somewhat used to often being disappointed in that whatever materials remained or were preserved, were kept for whatever reason, that's what we have, and you don't always have everything you want. And that's just kind of the nature of archival research and historical research. So when you're trying to kind of find the more historical stuff, we can help you up to a point. We can point you to all these great resources. I'm learning a lot today that I didn't know about how these things are tucked away in different parts of the city. I remember your session from 2021 was also very illuminating for me. So just like we would with any other kind of historical research question, we would refer them to the places we knew about and hope for the best. But the nature of archival research is such that sometimes that thing just didn't survive. So
I had to give that answer a lot, unfortunately. All right, Doug.
I think one of the biggest problems people run in with us is they'll contact a court or an agency and they'll tell them that we sent the records to the archives, when what they really did is they still own it and it's being stored in a record center. And so the people contact us, we have no idea what we're talking about because we haven't accessioned it. And then we eventually figure out it's in the record center, but the record center is specifically told not to deal with the public. They're supposed to send the records back to the agency and let the agency deal with the public. So if you do talk with a court or an agency and they refer you over to us, try to get a transfer or a session number and a box number from them, because that'll make figuring out who actually owns it and who's supposed to do reference on it a lot easier. A lot of people are frustrated because there's also not, the disposition dates are just the earliest that the records could be destroyed. That doesn't necessarily mean they'll be transferred over to the archives. You know, so they want to know, is everything after 15 years at your place? And it's like, no, it's like 15 years after the case closed, and the case might drag on for 30 years or something. There's some Chicago records are here and some are centralized elsewhere. And again, that's why you should contact us first, because there's not really a good rhyme or reason I can explain. FBI records, I can tell you, are not here unless they were used as evidence in a court case. Those are at Archives 2 in College Park. There's no Work Progress Association records here. Those are also there. Due to space issues, U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals and bankruptcy courts are in a cave in Lenexa, Kansas. And there's any number of other weird things like that where you would think it would be here, but it's not. Generally, most records are open to the public when they come. Some court records may be sealed. We don't have any control over that. You have to work with the judge to get it unsealed. Some executive records may come with restrictions. Most don't, but if that happens, if it's like a privacy thing, we may be able to screen it. If it's something like nuclear secrets, you know, that may take a little bit longer to figure out how to give you access to that. But I do want to say court records, the assumption is that if it went to trial, it's open to the public, or even if it didn't go to trial, if it's in a court case, unless the court has sealed it, it's open to the public. So it's always a good place to start.
Thank you. And Matt.
My battery may be low, so I might have to go to plan B soon. So if my monitor drips out, that's why.
Okay, thanks, Doug. And I'll turn it over to Matt.
You know, I think there's so many different avenues to researching Chicago history. And I think that if you think that you've hit a roadblock, it might just be because you're looking in the wrong place. Between there are a bunch, I would say that a couple of things. One is start by familiarizing yourself with the LibGuide that the Northeastern people put together, Northeastern Illinois people put together. It's a really good way to kind of orient yourself about all the different records and kind of gives a lot of contextual information as to what they are, and then maybe why they are where they are, and how to access them. Another really good resource is the Secretary of State's local government database. And that is a website where you can, for example, look at the IRAD holdings for Chicago municipal records. You can see what kinds of records they have, and the date range, and then just know that oh, and also the Municipal Records Center has a ton of resources. So in any of these places, like, even if they don't have what you're looking for, they might be able to refer you. Certainly I would be happy to, you know, if we don't have something that you're looking for, and we know who does, of course, we're going to refer you. It's not always instinctual why things are the way they are, even aside from, you know, like politics or whatever led to these decisions. You know, for example, we don't have aldermanic records, we have committee records. You know, UIC, I think, has the Richard Daily paper. So you just never know. You might not, you know, think something is in a certain place, but it is. And then lastly, I would just add that if you're really running into an access issue where you know exactly what you want and you're not able to get it, if you're talking about a city agency, use the FOIA option. They take that very seriously. Our office, you know, I respond to FOIA requests all the time. Again, you don't need to submit a FOIA request in order for us to help you, but if you do, it is kind of a more formalized process, and that may give you, you know, it may feel less like shouting into the dark by using that, because they will definitely follow up. But yeah, there's a lot to, there's a lot out there. And oh, and one last resource I would add to go along with the Secretary of State's local records database and the NEIU LibGuide is the Chicago Collections Consortium webpage. You can go to a tab, like a government tab, and it'll list all kinds of records available from different local repositories that have to deal with government in Chicago as a subject. So that's another option. There's a lot. Just because you hit a roadblock doesn't mean you're not going to be able to find something that will work eventually.
And I'll just confirm quickly, I put some of these in the chat, but we also will put all of these in our resource list at the end. And regarding the FOIA requests, we had several FOIA experts in our 2021 panel, so I will link to those as well, because they had some really great resources for if you were new to that process. All right, so we've reached our last directed panelist question, which I think is a really fun one. So this is, what are some of the hidden gems of your collection's government records that you would like researchers to know more about? So Matt, I'm actually going to turn it back over to you to start this one again.
Okay, so yeah, that is a fun question. And it just so happens that I have been looking at a collection that is basically hidden right now, and we are excited about making it accessible. It's not going to happen right away, but I'm referring to the audio recordings of the city council meetings from 1970 to 2010 when they started video recording. These audio recordings were done on reel-to-reel tapes starting in 1970, and at some point in the 80s, they switched to cassettes. And none of this stuff has ever been reformatted, but we at least have it. I sent out a couple of the tapes to be digitized just to get a sense of, you know, if we could tell anything from the quality of the recordings, and just the few that we got back were like super interesting. I think if we're able to digitize the entire collection, which is our goal, and then make it accessible on our website, it's going to be an incredible resource for people interested in doing research into Chicago municipal history. And I asked Gretchen if I could play just a brief snippet. It's about 1.5 minutes, and she graciously said yes. And so I'm just going to play it just to give you a sense of what the kind of material that's on these tapes. For me personally, you know, our office, you know, produces the journal, which is a very important document. It's a very dry document because it's just, you know, legislation. The actual recordings of these people deliberating on this legislation is a very different kind of record that I think is kind of fascinating. It's certainly much more human. It gives you a lot more insight into the personalities involved. So the snippet I'm going to play is from a city council meeting on November 30th, 1970. This is when Richard J. Daley was mayor. And what I found really interesting about it is just how it just shows you how, Chicago and cities like Chicago have been dealing with the same issues forever, whether it's police accountability or gun violence and crime, people who are, coming from different ends of the political spectrum. There's these issues have just been ongoing forever. So the clip I'm going to play is of Richard J. Daley addressing the council about a police officer who had been slain during, I believe, a mugging that he ended up getting shot in the back and killed. And so Daley kind of expounds on, the culture of gun violence that was gripping the city and anti-police sentiment. And anyway, it's just, I thought it might be interesting to people who are interested in Chicago history. So I'm just going to play it right now.
I think this again brings out the fact, gentlemen of the council, that somehow, some way, there has to be legislation to take weapons away from people that shouldn't have them. We constantly read of the program of propaganda, of hatred against a man that wears the uniform of a policeman in our country. We know what this is creating in the minds of people. And we know what a weapon in the hands of incompetent, some affected mentally, others affected through the insatiable buildup of hatred against other people, will do. And we have to, all of us, not only the policemen and their families who suffer as a result of it, we must and we should insist upon some national gun legislation to take these weapons away from people, and particularly organizations that openly declare themselves against the men in the uniform of the police of our country. There's no reason why this can't be accomplished.
So, yeah, that was a clip I found interesting, and I'm hopefully we are going to be able to get this project accomplished in about a year. That's the goal anyway right now, and then it'll be up on our website, and it'll go. These recordings go from Daley to Mayor, the Byrne administration, the Washington administration, which should be extremely interesting to researchers. I know like CPL has the text of the speeches, as Joanna was saying, but I think it'll be, something really special to be able to hear him speaking, Mayor Washington speaking during these meetings. So that is the collection I wanted to highlight, and I hope to make it available soon.
Thank you for sharing, Matt. And I'll go ahead and turn it over to Deborah. Let me share.
Thank you. And I sent Gretchen a link, which I'm going to impose upon her to share with all of you. This is not, I'm hoping not so much a hidden gem, but it is the thing that I want to highlight. So Gretchen, if you would just scroll down a little bit. This is an example on one of our dashboards, and this is in the public safety category. And this is one example of our map dashboards. So I wanted to highlight this because wherever possible across the different categories of data that we have up on our information portal, wherever the data lends itself to doing so, we include maps with different options for geographic breakdowns, police district and beat, ward, community area, et cetera. And that is driven by the notion that Chicago and Chicago government and the rendering of city services in Chicago those are very neighborhood driven, geographically driven questions. We think a lot about the fact that across the city, when we think about crime and the quality of delivery of city services and so on, inequities compound. And so where there are areas of the city and residents of the city that are challenged in some of those areas or underserved in some areas, they are often underserved in many areas. And so we use these mapping functions to kind of bring that to life. We talk about the idea in oversight that there are many, that there's one heat map of Chicago, and you can change the title to a lot of different things. And that's sort of the principle underlying this work. So this particular one that's up on the screen is this is mapping 911 calls for police service across the city, where those calls are coming from, the types of calls they are, the priority level, whether those calls are behavioral health related, et cetera. And then we kind of have off to the side by way of reference, census data by the geographic areas which are on the map. So you can kind of get a sense of what those neighborhoods look like as on demographic dimensions. While you are looking at, and again, you can filter according to your interest, you can filter by priority area or call type or behavioral health status and so on. So there are many map dashboards on our information portal. This is just one that I wanted to use as an example to highlight that feature of the work.
Thank you, Deborah. I hope we have a very quick question because I know we need to move on to Joanna, and if we have Doug back, also Doug. But one person did ask if the data that underlies these data visualizations are available for download or request.
Not always is sort of the short answer, because much of this data comes from other city departments. But if people have questions, they are more than welcome to reach out to us, and we will talk through whether we can help. And if not, we may be able to point them in a direction of what they need.
Okay, thank you. All right, Johanna, what would be your hidden gem?
So it's not hidden in the sense that it's not open yet. It's processed, it's open, it's available for research. And in the 10 years I've been here at CPL, I am seeing it be used increasingly more frequently. I think in part because it's a more recent collection and that it documents a more recent time in history. And so now, as time goes on, that becomes further in the past and maybe more of a subject for historical research. And that's the open space section records. So the open space section identifies areas of the city that could become open or green spaces that for whatever reason they're not currently being used. They acquire the land and then they turn it over either to the Department of Transportation or the Park District to administer. And so among the projects that are documented in that collection are the 606, and then a lot of the environmental restoration projects that are going on the southeast side of Chicago. And we're seeing a lot of people kind of start to tap into that. We've had a lot of researchers looking at the environmental restoration down on the southeast side. And I think that collection is only going to get used more and more as time goes on.
Oh, that sounds great. And I believe that we do have Doug back. So Doug, you're on a speed run for your hidden gem.
All right. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Yeah, so I had a challenging time whittling this down. I'm going to mostly talk about court records, but I just want to remind everyone that 30% of our holdings are not court records, and that's still a lot of stuff too. But like I said, court records are good because the majority of them are open to the public. They deal with a wide variety of topics because someone somewhere sometime made a federal case out of something you're either directly or indirectly interested in. So there's cases that deal with the history of Chicago itself. So after the Chicago fire, there were a lot of cases of people trying to recover their property or investments and stuff, and there's a lot of statements, where were you at this moment in the fire and stuff like that. There's the records from the Pullman strike, both against the labor union and also by the railroads against the city of Chicago for lost money and damages. We have the Iberia Hampton civil case file that stemmed out of the murder of Fred Hampton and Mark Clark, the Chicago 7 or 8 trial, depending on how you want to start counting it. Records deciding who's liable for the downtown Chicago flood, any number of different cases like that. The federal government often gets involved with the Chicago city government through the federal courts as well. So there's court cases involving education in Chicago, the Webb case, the Burroughs case, and other ones where people are alleging systemic discrimination in the Chicago public schools. There's the Chicago African American Patrolmen's League that alleged systemic discrimination in the Chicago Police Department, the Gautreaux lawsuit that alleged systemic discrimination in the Chicago Housing Authority. In all those cases, both sides have to present evidence for why they think there is or is not systemic discrimination. So it's also a great snapshot into the city history at that time as well. We also have the recently got the Shackman case, which changed the patronage system and political hiring in Chicago as we know it. Kind of tied in, that kind of leads to corruption as well. I made a joke with the state archivist, Dave Jones, that I'm going to have more governor records than he will pretty soon, the way things are going. But in addition to governors, any number of Chicago political leaders have run into trouble with Operations Gaylord, Silver Shovel, or stuff like that. Of course, crime is not just limited to politicians. We have no shortage of organized crime case files, most notably Al Capone, but there's numerous other small-time people who have been prosecuted in the courts for organized crime. There's also some true crime stories. The Tylenol case was heard in Chicago. The Brock Candy Heiress case was heard at the U.S. District Courts. And then also a lot of cultural history appears in there as well because people will be pursuing copyright or intellectual property cases. So you end up with a lot of stuff about musicians, about authors, a lot of interesting inventors, or even just stuff about like the Chicago L, because somebody debated about particular mechanism for the track switching or something like that, and now there's all kinds of photos on different parts of the Chicago L. So that was my quick overview of everything we have. So I don't know. I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you. And I knew our panelists were going to have a lot to share. So we are unfortunately at the end of the hour, but if you have asked a question, we will make sure to get it to our panelists. And if they know any answers, we will get that information back to you. And now hopefully you know a little bit more about where to go and who to approach. As I mentioned, we'll be putting together a list of any and all resources mentioned during this panel, and that will be sent out to registrants, but it will also be attached to wherever our recordings are posted. So even if someone did not register, they can still see those. I want to thank all our panelists so much. This was amazing. I learned a ton and I thought I knew a lot, but I didn't. So thank you. Thank you to Jeannie Long for helping to coordinate. And thank you to Elise Ferriello for keeping us on track and helping me moderate. And thank you so much to everyone who attended. It was great to see everybody. And yeah, this has been a wonderful event. So stay tuned for that resource list, and please stay tuned for any other follow-ups because there's a lot more city records out there. So thank you everybody so much.